Okay, well, it is 2:15, so I felt I better say hi to everybody. And I have a few ideas of what everybody might want to talk about here with the idea of foundations of online teaching. What are they? And where do I begin? So I'm going to throw out a few things that I think are important on that subject. Let me make sure I got the chat going here too. And basically figure out what anybody, and that's the other thing. We got quite a bit of time here. I'm not hoping to keep this confined to some specific area, other than, I guess, just in the general vicinity of foundations of online teaching. What are they and where do they begin? So I do teach a course called Foundations of Online Teaching, which I built and developed. It seems to be pretty popular as far as the course itself and how it's designed. I want to start out with one thing, and it's come up here. I've got some slides here that have a little bit to do with it, and I have the course that I can show, but I'm willing to be flexible, be driven by whatever anybody wants to talk about and how. But so the foundations of online teaching are basically, you've got your design of your course, your instructional design, figuring out what you're going to teach and how you're going to teach it online. And then there's also technology. And I think those, how to use technology, what technology is going to work, what technology serves best the purposes that you're trying to achieve. They're kind of two opposite sides of the coin in this discussion. I think the foundations of teaching online, basically what you want to do is start out looking at foundations. And that's what ED 5101 did. I don't know why this wants to change so fast so often, but it is not a how to use technology course. It's focused on instructional design, learning objectives and alignment, using backwards design. So you start out, and that's what I think is important, is that before people get focused on, am I going to use Zoom, or how do I use this or that, or how am I going to record a video? First of all, set up your course, figure out what you're going to teach. Start out with learning objectives, and I have got some better diagrams of this, but, and then next, this is backwards design, classic backwards design approach. Next, align your assessments to them. Skip right to assessments. How am I going to measure these good learning objectives once you've settled in on what learning objectives there are? Third, figure out what activities, learning activities, along with assessment. And in online learning activities and assessments, there's a very blurry line between the two of them. They're often, each are sort of one of each. But figure out what activities your students will do that'll directly support those assessments and learning objectives. And then move on to choosing your technology and content. And in this class here, we did just that. These other things are just facts about it, focused on instructional design. And we like to say it walks the walk. I do, at least. Models best practices while teaching them in an authentic way. And real quick on this overview. So starts with learning objectives, designs backwards from those objectives, assess for learning in an authentic way, and creates an engaging class rich in interactions and active learning. So that's another thing that's important. It takes more time and more effort, but you've got to have an engaging class rich in interactions and active learning if you're going to expect students to stay motivated to take part in it. It does end up with students making a short online lesson that they can use in their future online courses, ideally. Each of their design tasks throughout the 7 modules feeds into that capstone project. So first is assessments, or first is learning objectives, then assessments, then learning activities, like I said. And other than that, I can provide a brief course tour of some of the features in that class. But let's get the Q&A going in the discussion and see what you guys actually want to talk about rather than just what I'm throwing out there. If anybody. Zoom videos, 5 minutes over. Thanks. I'm checking the Q&A right now. Thanks, Matthew. Tell Kendra and friends if you want to head back to session A. Okay, so we don't have anything in Q&A. Does anybody want to throw open their mic? and ask anything about this stuff. Otherwise, I can until I hear something, I can throw out a brief overview of what I'm talking about in respect to this course. And it's some of the stuff I talk about before. I start right out with introducing the course to myself with a short video, and talk about the learning objectives, what you just saw, create measurable learning objectives, create online assessments, create engaging online course activities with learner interactions, select content for an online course in technology. And back to modules. More specifically, when we get into module 1 here, folks at Indiana University were nice enough to make this little diagram here readily available for anybody that wants to use it, and I did borrow that. So you see we've got the flow chart here of learning outcomes, followed by assessment, followed by learning activities, and then content. And some people tend to think, oh wow, I'm surprised you go right to assessment and not activities first. But the way you're going to assess, it's a clean process to think separately about how you're going to assess these learning objectives, especially your bigger summative assessments, and then jump into what learning activities and content will support all of that. So I believe, in my own opinion, that's all that stuff, is good to figure out before you start deciding what kind of technology can best support that process that you've laid out. As far as I'm going to teach this, these are the learning objectives I want my students to achieve. This is how I will assess them to know whether or not they achieved them. And these are the activities and the content that I'm going to use to support those assessments and objectives. Then you can decide what you need, if video is going to be appropriate, how to use it and where, and then what to use. Some of the more details about this course. Again, I'd like to stop for a minute here. Anybody have anything in the chat or anything they want to pipe in? Feel free to open up your mic. Yeah, yes, anybody?
I was just going to say at Ferris, we do the same thing when we teach the course design that you do, where we start with the outcomes and assessments first, and then do activities and then participation pieces. So we do the same thing as far as backward design, with not starting with activities, start with the assessments too.
Yeah, I saw a few backwards design. I think it's fairly universal, but initially and kind of like everybody else I was talking with was, oh, assessments next? And then, I was like, well, no, look, that's the way it is here. That's the way this model is. That's the way QM is structured, So those folks must know what they're talking about. And yeah, the other thing I like that I learned sort of side effect wise is that, like I say, it's a cleaner way before you decide, well, the textbook says this and I've got this kind of technology and I want to do this activity, to kind of in a cleaner environment decide this is the best way to assess these learning objectives, and then start laying everything out from there. And again, that is, in my opinion, definitely a foundation of online learning or online teaching, particularly, is get a nice clear subject of what you need to teach, what your learning objectives are, and how you're going to assess them before you start getting into some of the side stuff. And what's pretty neat about that is in teaching, and some of you guys that are from MTU may realize or have heard this, but what we discovered, interestingly enough, in teaching this process, was that an actual majority of the teachers took the time to speak out and say, this is going to enlighten, or I'm going to use this technique in all my teaching, not just my online teaching. This is really giving me a better approach to how I'm going to organize all my courses in general. And I really thought that was pretty cool. It's actually in some ways no surprise, because it's not specific. It's instructional design. It's not specific to online learning as far as establish your learning objectives and then go about backwards design from there.
True.
So yeah, feel free. I am keeping an eye on the chat here and ready for anybody to pipe in. Until such time, I will go ahead and say, so in module 1, this is where it all begins. I talk about what is and what isn't a good learning objective. the unit learning objectives here were describe the process of backward design and how it applies to the development or revision of online courses or lessons, and create 1 to 2 observable and measurable learning objectives for your short online lesson. The reason there's so few in this class, I keep the online lessons to just an hour. And that's actually primarily so that I and their fellow students can have enough time to go through them towards the end of course and do peer review and evaluation. But it necessitates keeping things at a minimum, like not too many learning objectives. And it also, in this particular class, that short time limit keeps this from being about them spending hours and hours building in Canvas, and more time learning about how to create good learning objectives and how to decide how best to assess them and things like that. And Module 1 here is a pretty good demonstration. We talk about what is backwards design. Zip right in there to what are good learning objectives. And definitely get some pushback here. There are still a lot of adherence to students will understand or students will learn. And I definitely have to say, I know it's got to be a measurable and observable thing your students will be able to do upon completing your lesson or course. This document here I took from Texas Tech. If you get a chance, writing and assessing course level student learning outcomes from Texas Tech is an excellent, power-packed, concise, short thing on learning objectives. There's probably, with all the white space they most appropriately use, there's probably 6 pages here, and it's got everything. Good examples, bad examples of learning objectives, how to apply them, how to tie them back with Bloom's taxonomy and a list of verbs in those areas of Bloom's taxonomy that, you know, your action verbs that they can use. I really like it. I think highly of it. Additional resources. Let's go back to modules. Take a break. How about anybody else? Does anybody have a thought themselves on what makes for good foundations of teaching online, where you would think that you should begin, and or maybe a question about how you might want to begin? Because a lot of people have been thrust online here all of a sudden, and we've actually had to kind of make a little bit of a distinction at Michigan Tech. Hi.
Yeah, I actually just kind of have a question about where do you think you should start from adapting? I mean, have you always taught that class online? And I guess that's kind of my question of, I always had kind of some of my tests online, but I did, because I kind of thought I'd rather spend time in class covering topics than testing. But now that it's kind of moving towards that, what do you think the best, is there a step-by-step process? Should you you record your videos first or record an introduction? What do you think as you're trying to transition? What is a step-by-step process to take?
Well, first of all, yeah, this particular class, I've always taught it online. I say right in the intro, part of what you're learning here is what it's like to be an online student. So, and I just thought that made sense. But to me, you're kind of looking at what I would think would be a second step, even if you've already taught this class face-to-face or blended for that matter. It sounds like you're doing at least some degree of blending. I'm assuming that the students that are taking this Foundations of Online Teaching course actually have taught these subjects face-to-face, and that right now what they're going to do is they're going to step back and they're going to reevaluate with an open mind what are the learning objectives that I am going to have my students achieve online. Because one of the things that comes up a lot in both the content module and in there is, chances are you might have to throw some stuff out. You might realize that some of this stuff is, nice rather than vital. And then decide how you're going to assess them. And now you're deciding how you're going to assess them online, which is possibly different. You're going to probably want to try and minimize any dependence on formal traditional exams, for example, if you're teaching online, if possible. And so there's another place where you're going to have to step back and try to do something. And then you go through all that, then decide what content supports it and what content or what activities are going to support those and what content and technologies you'll use. Next, as far myself, I would go with laying things out in the LMS first and then recording the videos next. Now that's going to be different with some people. Some people put a lot more lecture material into video than I myself would, at least suggest. So I'm going to try to get what people would think of, traditionally as the lecture for the course. I'm going to try to get that to be primarily text with some real short videos and videos from elsewhere, maybe some simulations or animations if I get them, images, graphics, that kind of stuff.
Can I jump in here to what we do at Ferris?
Yes.
So I just want to answer that question. We have a lot of different things we help you with in e-learning, but one of our processes, and we also use it in our CDA process, the course development agreement process, but you can use it even for face-to-face. It's a matrix. It's called the outcomes alignment matrix. We call it the OAM. I can put that in the day one information. So what it does is map everything out. So it's a lot easier to see the balance of your course and everything when you kind of have it all mapped in a matrix versus if it's on the syllabus, it's linear. You just really can't tell those things. That you really can see it if you have it in a matrix as far as which week, what they're doing, what outcomes they're hitting, which activities, which assessments. And if you like, I can add that to the day one too, that you can take a look at that if you're looking to start to try to think through how to put that, how to structure it. It's a pedagogy piece, so you can use it for face-to-face too, but we have people put it into that first before they put it online, because then you can literally just take everything and put it in the modules from there into Canvas. It's so much easier. Saves a lot of time.
I was just trying, we have something similar. I didn't get a chance. I was trying to dig up, it's kind of really just a spreadsheet that we use in a similar fashion here. If someone's coming in to start out in our kind of instructional design process of lay out all that stuff, what your objectives and what your assessments and stuff like that are for each module in your course or each unit.
There's a question in the chat too from Karen at KCAD. So that's Ferris's art and design school. So I'm wondering if you wanted to share, like, what do you do? Like, tell us a little bit, what do you do when you want to put it online? Because then we could come up with ways to put it online if you tell us what you do face to face.
And Kelly, you were speaking to Karen, right?
Are you asking me or are you asking Thom?
I was asking Karen, if you could just tell us kind of what do you do in the class, and then Thom and he can give you some ideas, or I could give you some ideas on how to do that online.
Well, I teach art history, and so at least the undergraduate classes, there is a lot of lecture. I expect a lot of discussion and a lot of interaction with the students, but we show a lot of images. And so when we were forced to go to an online format, I already had a lot of PowerPoints and I put more text in them and things like that. But I was told not to just record lectures because it's going to be too long. There's too much information. And so I asked questions and expected the students to do the reading. Students didn't want to do the reading. So I need to know what kind of activities I can use. If I can't lecture, I know that I can give them PowerPoints, but I keep hearing these things about online learning, about engaging the students and breaking things up. And I don't know what's the next step. And we've got assessments, we've got learning outcomes. I need something about, like, what are we supposed to do with the students? I mean, I hear that some people send them to websites to look at like a piece of architecture, and they do like a 360. They can go to Google Maps, they can go to Google Images, they can do a lot of different things, but I need to know, like, there's just this gap in terms of, like, what am I supposed to do online versus what do I do in the classroom? Thank you. I'm going to mute again.
Thom, you want to take it first? Because I can answer too.
Go ahead. You're on mic, and then I can add to that.
Okay. So Karen, what I would do probably is, and I'll give you some ideas, and you did mention quite a few of them which would work that people do use. So I guess what I would do is I could just set up a time and talk with you about, like, each week, like, what are you doing that week for face-to-face? So maybe it is looking at different images, but then instead of just looking at the pictures, you have them do a Google, view of the area, because we can't get over to Europe or wherever they're from, and so we could actually design just different ones. We could help you with that in e-learning, because it would really depend what your assignment is face to face. So is that helpful for them to look at the architecture, or is it something where you maybe have some scenarios of in the discussion board? Show them an image of something that you haven't shown them yet, and ask them which period is it from. Like scenarios, you could say, is it from this one or this one? And here's the picture. So they're looking for those specific things that would tell you which era it's from. I don't know what your assessment is that you're doing on in face-to-face, but then we could put it online, whether it's scenarios, or go look, on Google, find something that relates to that era on online and post it and explain why, or what are the characteristics or traits of it, or I don't know what your assignments are, but there's definitely ways we could put that online, that we could bring that to life for you, for your students. Feel free to contact me or anyone in e-learning, and we can go actually through each one if you want, to help you with the ideas to how to make the jump.
And sometimes even just going through this, it sounds kind of simplistic, but going through what you did in a certain face-to-face class will almost immediately lend itself to an alternative that you could do online. Simple enough. I mean, a lot of times I'll be talking to instructors about that there's no way they can use short videos to replace 50 minutes of class. And the one thing I'll say is, well, chances are you probably weren't lecturing straight for 50 minutes. You started out in the beginning with a sort of, this is what we did last week, and this is what's coming up, and you're going to want to look out for this and that, and test is coming up. That's sort of like your, little 5-minute guide on the side video in the beginning. If students were, if you were having a moment or an area or a chunk of your class where discussion was going on, where you asked them questions and they talked back, and they maybe talked a little bit with each other and had a discussion, there you go. There's a use for a discussion board of some sort, or discussion board alternative. If they did anything where they broke up into small groups, looked at some of those images and discussed them, or in some way, talked about some of the stuff that you looked at, that would be a great place, if you're a campus, or there's group tools for any LMS, to do a group activity where they're doing that in the online version, and talking about the images, discussing, coming up, doing some kind of project that relates to it in a group, in their group space as a small group, and doing anything that you can to get groups to interact with each other. If you have a time and can pull it off, is real good for a way to get that engagement and interaction and active learning going on in your online courses. Does that in any way help at all there, Karen?
Yeah, that helps. Thank you.
Can I piggyback off that, Karen's question? This is Sue speaking. I think for me, what's really hard about this transition, this format, is that in some cases, I feel like we're not helping students develop reading and concentration skills when we say that, they can't, less text is better, or the content has to be chunky or should be chunky. And so I feel like that's a real challenge for me, because my lectures, yes, it's true, I would break up a lecture with a question to the class, but it seems to me in the online format, when you do that, you're asking them to, stop what they're thinking about, go to the next thing, and they may or may not be with you at that moment. They may put it off or whatever, they organize it around their schedule, and it sort of breaks the concentration, or at least there's the risk of breaking the concentration. So I find that really difficult, because the kind of stuff that I do involves theoretical kinds of questions or philosophical kinds of questions, and thinking through an example or whatever. So while I can in some ways break it up with discussion, I tend to do a kind of longer. I mean, I'm trying to take what you're all saying in terms of recognizing where I can actually do, right, a shorter video that sets up the module, a short video that sets up what we did last week, and then perhaps a longer video that sets up what we're doing in this lecture. And then after that, refer them to a discussion without necessarily expecting that they're going to come back to the same lecture, but maybe the next day and we move on or something. I don't know. I'm finding it very challenging, and I worry a lot about the fact that we're just reinforcing a lack of attention span in this format.
Well, I completely agree with you. And part of my problem is that the students come into my classes, even though they're supposed to master art history, they don't know a lot of history. And if they're not going to read, if that's, I just feel like I'm gutting all the material from the classes. And, doing something like, as helpful as this is, I'm just really going to have to think a lot about how to tackle this. But having them go to the internet and pull something and talk about a couple of characteristics isn't really going to be enough. And I worry that they're going to come out of the classes with not even a rudimentary concept of how to analyze a work of art. And that means that people are going to get a BFA in either art and design, and they're not going to really understand art of the past, and that's a real problem. So I am just struggling with this about how do you put really complicated material into an online class and have it be, I'm not asking it to be the same, but at least somewhat comparable to what I do in the classroom. And another thing that I struggled with is that most of the students in my classes are visual learners. They're hands-on learners. And when we transitioned, I know part of this is about just the trauma of everything that's going on now, but they hated it. And I don't know how to get them to love a subject again. And again, I'll mute, but thank you, Susan, for those comments.
Karen, how about things like, the museum documentaries or snippets from the Smithsonian or some kind of videos like that. And to the prior comment, I just want to say, after today, pay attention to how you feel. In other words, they have research out right now that they say if you usually work 8 hours, if you're working online, make it 4, you're going to feel just as exhausted. So when you're saying they can't pay attention, people actually have to pay attention double hard, if that makes sense, harder than they would if they were in a face-to-face. It's just a lot more energy that goes into learning online. So it's not that they're not learning how to concentrate. They have to concentrate harder, so they have to do smaller steps. Because if you think how you're going to feel after today, and they've got 3 or 4 classes in a week, that's how tiring it's going to be if they're doing those really long. So it is different as far as how it wears on you mentally and your attention span and physically. That is different than online, which is where the chunks come into play, so that they aren't losing. And otherwise, you're going to lose everybody just from fatigue, and they're not going to have input. Where if it's chunked, then they'll be able to take in more if it is chunked up a little bit more. So that's where that comes from anyway, from the research on that.
Yeah, that's super true there, Kelly. And the other thing I seem to be hearing, but I'm not sure if I seem to hear it from Karen and Sue, was the students not reading for a long time. I think what we were talking about is just not making videos long. There's really nothing that either one of us or really anybody that I know, other than amount of time altogether that somebody spends on a class, that's telling anybody, that reading assignments for online learners have to be shorter. It's just that ability for somebody to pay attention to somebody speaking at them on a computer screen, the duration of anybody's ability to pay attention to that is much less than it is face to face. And again, like I said, I'm sure nobody was really standing there for 50 minutes or whatever it was, just straight lecturing. Yeah. And as we often say, if you were, you probably should have been breaking that up with some questions and some little more active stuff anyways. And don't be afraid to take some of the stuff that you used to say and turn it into a combination of images and text and graphics and stuff like that, and short videos. Because that's going to help you minimize some of the video. What used to be a lecture is probably, it's not just going to be video of you. It's going to be a combination of all those things. It's going to be text. It's going to be graphics. It's going to be images. It's going to be animations. It's going to be little short videos. And you're going to need to mix it up for a variety of reasons.
Because I teach media studies, I already have a lot of images and video, but I tend to embed all that into PowerPoint slides. So so basically what I'm hearing is that I could be breaking that up into just, now that they're done with this, click on the next one kind of thing. And again, the reason that bothers me is because I feel like, it's easy to be, they could pause the video at any moment, I suppose, and go do something else, or they can leave it running and walk out of the room, no matter how long it is. Yeah, I don't know. I just, I'm not sure. Are you saying that the research suggests that they can't look at a video where I'm talking to them with images, perhaps moving images and short clips and that sort of thing, longer than 20 minutes, or like what is the basic amount that's recommended based on what research we have?
I don't know, Tom can speak to this, but from what I have found on lots of different resources has been about 10 to 15 minute chunks. You could do 20, but that's long. That's like how long our presentation sessions are, and it's a lot to take in if you don't have your own little secluded closet, and you want them to be able to focus on everything that you're teaching them. So I don't know, Tom, you can speak to that.
Yeah, and nobody can, the idea is you have a goal that you're shooting for it, and you're going to minimize more length than you can. And one of the things you were talking about, Sue, too, as far as people being able to discuss something while you're lecturing it, that might have been able to happen face to face, but you would have to come up with some alternative anyways. Sorry about that. Some alternative anyways, if it's going to be online, because that just wouldn't have been able to happen, because it's a recording of you, obviously, unless you're doing a live synchronous session, and that's different than video. If you're just doing live synchronous, that's not the same thing we're talking about as minimizing the length of your videos.
Yeah, that's right. I'm not talking about that. Yeah.
So, and what frequently happens, I was an online student too. You're staring, and as far as you're listening to the video, but then you realize 5 minutes later, your mind's been somewhere else altogether after the first 5-10 minutes. I used to actually, funnily enough, I as an online student getting my master's degree, I started cutting up, because for whatever reason, the way I like to cook, I'm every day I'm cutting up carrots and onions and garlic and stuff. I started cutting vegetables while I was watching and listening to online videos for class, just so that my mind wasn't, that second space my mind could go was occupied with something so rote that I would still pay attention. So you just got to shoot for, I guess, trying to make sure that they're not any longer than they absolutely have to be for you to accomplish what you're trying to do.
Okay, I'm not optimistic about this, I have to tell you. Again, I really feel like it's a format that is reinforcing a lack of concentration, even though, that's where we're at, but it seems unfortunate to me. So thanks for the tips though.
Yeah, you're not alone there, Sue. It's universal, and there's a lot of people that when I said that statement to them, kind of said, no, actually, at least 45 minutes of it, I actually am just lecturing, and they're struggling with some way to trim that back. But like say, a live synchronous session would be different, and you may be able to find that some of the stuff that you're if you're lecturing over PowerPoint images, that some of that stuff maybe, again, you could chunk it and move some of that stuff into a separate video, or even just part of it could be text and graphics that stand alone and are outside of the part that you use with you talking in a video. And let me see here. Sorry about the phone, by the way, there. I had my cell phone taken care of and forgot there was even a landline in this room. We got anything kicking in the chat here? Thanks, Kelly. Great questions. And they are. Those are definitely challenges. Those are great questions. Challenges for most online teachers, especially those just making this transition.
Absolutely.
What else? I can until somebody else pops up. It's a little easier for me. It's not really fair because of the subject I'm teaching and stuff in this class. But if I share this course screen again, what I was talking about, this module 1, for example, my actual, at least what I think of as my lecture. This video is like 7 minutes or 5 minutes, or hard to say, but within there, if it was longer than that, I edit it back because I need to sort of set examples in this course. But what I kind of consider the lecture in this course is the rest of this stuff that occurs on these next 3 Canvas pages, which is, a lot of text, some animations, some more videos, pictures, links to stuff on the web, another interactive web activity, animations, graphics, yet another interactive web activity where you plug in stuff and it does something. And this, workbook, which is all just text. And boom, then we're done. But so that's an example of what I mean about, at least in that example, and that's only a 1 credit course, of course, so it's a little easier for me to keep things short. But that
Well, out of curiosity, what are these interactive web activities? Are there sites out there that you've created them, or you created the content and they're participating in it, or is it something that's already created and you're just sending them to that site?
Well, Quizlet, you can make your own or use one that somebody else.
Okay. Yeah, I know what a Quizlet is. I thought it was maybe something else. You didn't name a software, so I was curious.
No,
There are
and
simulations that are free. You can just Google free simulations, because one of the universities in Colorado have a whole bunch. You can just pick subject and content and level that you want, that you can have students do, and you don't have to create it. So you can find free ones out there too for answer that question. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's fine. I was just gonna say the learning outcomes generator was just something that was out there on the web that actually is interactive too. When you click on it, you type in stuff and it generates stuff back out. So mostly just stuff out there on the web in some way or another for this course. I'm familiar with some good simulations that come out of Wolfram Alpha and PhET for STEM type courses. And that breaks up the page of text that is also there, gives them a chance to break away from the reading and actually do something that, feeds back to them a little bit.
I've just gotten word that we're going to do our closing at 3, so we don't need a break between, so people can just be done. And we're going to just talk into closing for like 10 minutes on stuff for tomorrow and stuff coming up the next day, and then we're going to close it down.
It doesn't seem like we're overwhelmed with questions that we won't be able to answer by then anyways, but as long as we're going on last call here, can anybody think of anything they'd like to? I mean, feel free. Don't get me wrong, and I'm sure Kelly too. We're certainly not offended by people's concerns about what is often out there, whether it's research backed or figured as best practice. There's just stuff that rubs teachers the wrong way at times. So don't don't feel like you're in any way offending us, or, and hopefully it sounds like we're listening. Well, I guess hearing nothing, maybe it's about time for us to all wander back and